I'm getting pretty far on this Siddhartha book, and I really don't want to slow down, so I'm charging my phone a bit. By the river. Siddhartha wandered in the forest. He was already far from the city. He knew only one thing, that he could not go back, that the life he had led for many years was over and gone. He had sucked it and drained it to the point of revulsion. The songbird of his dream was dead. The bird in his heart was dead. He was profoundly enmeshed in samsara. He had sucked nausea and death into himself from every side as a sponge sucks up water until it is full. He was bloated with excess, with misery, with death. There was nothing left in the world that could attract him, nothing that could bring him pleasure or console him. He earnestly wished to know no more of himself, to have quiet, to be dead. Let a thunderbolt come and strike him dead. Let a tiger come and devour him. Let there just be a wine, a poison that could bring him numbness, oblivion, and sleep with no more awakening. Was there any sort of dirt left with which he had not dirtied himself? Any sin or folly which he had not committed? Any desolation of the soul that he had not brought upon himself? Was it still possible to live? Was it possible to draw breath and expel breath again and again, feel hunger and eat again, sleep again, lie with the woman again? He had not exhausted the cycle of existence. Had he not exhausted the cycle of existence and come to the end of it? Siddhartha arrived at the large river in the forest, the same river across which a ferryman had taken him when he was still a young man and was coming from the city of Gautama. At this river he stopped and remained standing hesitantly on the bank. He was weakened by fatigue and hunger, and what reason did he have to go on? Where was he going? What was his goal? No, there was no goal anymore. There was nothing left but a profound, painful longing to shake off this whole vile dream, to spew out this stale wine, to make an end to this wretched and disgraceful life. A tree grew bent over the riverbank, a coconut tree. Siddhartha leaned his shoulder against it, laid his arm over the trunk, and gazed down into the green water that flowed endlessly by. He gazed down and found himself wholly and completely filled with the desire to be rid of himself and sink beneath this water. A ghastly emptiness reflected back to him out of this water, which gave an answer to the terrible emptiness in his soul. Yet he had reached the end. There was nothing left for him to do but extinguish himself, to smash the ruined figure of his life. A ghastly emptiness reflected back to him out of the water, which gave an answer to the terrible emptiness in his soul. Yes, he had reached the end. There was nothing left for him to do but extinguish himself, to smash the ruined figure of his life, to throw it away at the feet, the sneering gods. This was the great wretching he longed for. Death, the shattering of the form he hated. Let the fish eat him, this dog Siddhartha, this madman, this spoiled and rotten body, this flagging, abused soul. Let the fish and crocodiles devour him. Let the demons tear him to pieces. His face contorted. He stared into the water. He saw the reflection of his face and spat at it. Profoundly weary, he slipped his arm from the tree trunk and turned a little to allow himself to fall straight down so he could go under at last. He sank, his eyes closed toward death. Just then, from remote precincts of his soul, out of one of the paths of his outworn life, came a sound. It was a word, a syllable, which he began to mumble mindlessly. The old word from the beginning and the end of every Brahmanic prayer, the sacred which means something like perfection or fulfillment. In the moment the sound of reached Siddhartha's ears, suddenly his slumbering mind awakened, and he recognized the foolishness of his action. Fear struck deep into Siddhartha. So this was the way things stood with him. He was so lost, so confused and forsaken by all wisdom, that he had been able to seek death. His wish, the wish he had had as a child to find peace, had grown so large he had sought it in the dissolution of his body. That which all the pain, all the disillusionment and despair of his recent life had not achieved, had been brought upon by the movement in which penetrated his awareness. He recognized himself in the midst of his misery and delusion. He said to himself, and he knew Brahman, realized the indestructibility of life, recognized once again the dimension of divinity he had forgotten. But this was just a moment, a flash. Siddhartha sank down at the foot of the coconut tree, laid his head on its root, and sank into a deep sleep. His sleep was deep and dreamless. It had been a long time since he had such a sleep. When he woke, after many hours, it was as though 10 years had passed. He heard the soft rushing of the water. He did not know where he was, who had brought him to this place. He opened his eyes and looked with amazement at the trees and sky above him. The past seemed veiled, infinitely far away, remote, infinitely unimportant. He only knew that he had abandoned his earlier life. In that first moment of thought, this earlier life struck him as some long ago former incarnation, like a previous birth of his present ego. He knew that he had abandoned that earlier life, that he had been so filled with misery and revulsion that he had wanted to throw his life away, but that by a river, under a coconut tree, he had come to himself with the sacred word on his lips. He had fallen asleep. Now, having reawakened, he looked at the world as a new man. Softly he uttered the word which he had fallen asleep saying, and it seemed to him that his whole long sleep had been nothing else but a long, fully absorbed recitation of a thinking of a submersion and a totally entry into the nameless, the perfect. What a wonderful sleep this had been. Never had sleeping so refreshed, renewed, and rejuvenated him. Perhaps he had actually died, had gone under and been reborn in a new form. But no, he knew himself. He knew his hands and his feet. He knew the place where he lay. He knew this ego in his breast, this self-willed, odd person, SIDDHARTHA. But this SIDDHARTHA was changed, renewed. He was remarkably well-rested, remarkably alert, cheerful, and inquisitive. SIDDHARTHA sat up and saw a stranger near him, a monk in a yellow robe with shaved head. Sitting in the posture of contemplation, he looked at the man who had no hair on the head or face, and he was not looking long before he recognized in this monk Govinda, the friend of his youth who had taken refuge with the exalted Buddha. Govinda had aged too, but his face still bore the same traits which expressed enthusiasm, loyalty, inquisitiveness, fearfulness. But now as Govinda, filling his gaze, opened his eyes and looked at him, SIDDHARTHA saw that Govinda did not recognize him. Govinda was happy to find him awake. Evidently, he had been sitting there a long time, waiting for him to wake up, even though he did not know him. I was asleep, said SIDDHARTHA. How did you happen to come here? You were asleep, answered Govinda. It is not good to sleep in such places, frequented by snakes and beasts of the wood. I, Lord, am a disciple of exalted Gautama, the Buddha, called Shakyamuni. I was passing this way with a number of our people when I saw you lying and sleeping in a place dangerous to sleep in. So I tried to wake you up, Lord, but when I saw that you were sleeping very deeply, I let my people go on and remain behind, sitting with you. And then so it seems, I who meant to watch over your sleep fell asleep myself. I performed my task badly, fatigue overcame me, but now that you are awake, let me go so I can catch up with my brothers. Thank you, Shramana, for guarding my sleep, SIDDHARTHA said. You disciples of the Exalted One are kind, now you may go. I am going, Lord, may goodness ever follow you. Thank you, Shramana. Govinda raised his hand in the sign of parting and said, Farewell. Farewell, Govinda, SIDDHARTHA said. The monk stopped. With your permission, Lord, how do you know my name? SIDDHARTHA smiled. I know you, Govinda, from the hut of your father, from the Brahmin school, from the sacrifices, from the journey we took going after the Shramanas, and from that time in the Jeta Grove when you took refuge with the Exalted One. You are SIDDHARTHA, Govinda loudly exclaimed. Now I recognize you and cannot understand how I could have failed to recognize you right away. Welcome, SIDDHARTHA. Great is my joy to see you again. I'm glad to see you again, too. You were the guardian of my sleep. I thank you for that again. Though I had no need of a guardian. Where are you going, my friend? I am going nowhere. We monks are always on the move unless it is the rainy season. We continually travel from place to place, living according to our rule, proclaiming the teaching, collecting alms, moving on. It is always that way. But you, SIDDHARTHA, where are you going? SIDDHARTHA said, It is the same with me, friend, as with you. I am going nowhere. I am just on the way, a wayfarer, a wanderer. Govinda said, You say you are a wanderer, and I believe you, but pardon me, SIDDHARTHA, you do not look like a wanderer. You look like you are wearing a rich man's garment, the shoes of a grandee, and your hair, which smells of perfume, is not the hair of a wanderer, of a Shramana. Your sharp eyes see well, my friend, but I did not tell you I was a Shramana. I just said I am a wanderer, and so it is, I am a wanderer. You are a wanderer, said Govinda, but there are few wanderers who wander in such clothing, with such shoes, with such hair. Never in my many years as a wanderer have I met such a wanderer. I believe you, Govinda, but now today you have met such a wanderer with such shoes and in such a garment. Remember, friend, impermanent is the world of forms. Clothing is impermanent, highly impermanent, along with the style of our hair itself, and our very bodies. I wear clothing of a rich man. You saw all right. I wear it because I was a rich man, and I wear my hair as people of the world do, seekers after pleasure, for I was one myself. And now, SIDDHARTHA, what are you now? I do not know any more than you do. I am on the way. I was a rich man, and am one no longer. What I will be tomorrow, I do not know. You lost your wealth. I lost it, or it me. It got away from me. The wheel of forms turned swiftly, Govinda. Where is the Brahmin, Siddhartha? Where is the Shramana, Siddhartha? Where is the rich man, Siddhartha? That which is impermanent changes swiftly, as you know, Govinda. Govinda looked at the friend of his youth for a long time with doubt in his eye. Then he took leave of him as one takes leave of a prominent person and went on his way. He scared him? Siddhartha looked after him, a smile on his face. He still loved him, this loyal, fearful person, and how would it have been possible not to love anybody or anything at this moment, in this glorious time after his wonderful sleep pervaded by That was precisely the magic that had been worked in him by during his sleep. That he loved everything, that he was filled with joyous love of everything he saw, and precisely that was the reason, so it seemed to him now, that he had been so very sick before, but he had been able to love anything or anybody, because he had been unable to love anything or anybody. With a smile on his face, Siddhartha watched the monk disappear. His sleep had strengthened him a great deal, but he was acutely tormented by hunger, for he had not eaten for 2 days, and the time was long in the past when he had been inured to hunger. With grief but almost humor, he thought about those times. And as he recalled, he had boasted to Kamala of 3 things, that he had mastered 3 noble and invincible arts: fasting, waiting, and thinking. This had been his wealth, his power and strength, his trusty staff. In the diligent, hard-working years of his youth, he had learned these 3 skills, nothing else. And now they had abandoned him. None of them belonged to him anymore. Neither fasting, nor waiting, nor thinking. He had given them away in exchange for the most miserable pittance, the most impermanent of things, sensual pleasure, comfort, and wealth. Strange but true, this is how it had been, and now it seemed to him he had actually become one of the child people. Siddhartha reflected on his situation. It was hard for him to think. Basically, he had no taste for it, but he forced himself. Now he thought, since all these highly impermanent things have gotten away from me, I stand once again under the sun as I stood as a child. I have nothing, I know nothing, I have no abilities, I have learned nothing. How strange. Now that I am no longer young, my hair is half gray, and my powers are on the wane. I am starting all over from the beginning like a child. He had to smile again. Yes, his fate was strange. He had come down in the world, and now here he was again, empty and naked and ignorant, but he could feel no sorrow over this. No. He even felt a strong impulse to laugh about himself, laugh about this strange, foolish world. You are going down, he said to himself, and laughed. And as he said it, his eyes fell on the river, and he saw the river was going down too, flowing ever downward and singing happily as it did. He liked that a lot. He gave the river a friendly smile. Was this not the river he had once intended to drown himself in 100 years ago, or had he only dreamed that? My life has been strange indeed, he thought to himself, has taken strange twists and turns. As a boy, I was totally involved with gods and sacrifices. As a youth, I was completely occupied with asceticism, thinking and meditating. I was searching for Brahman, and I worshipped the eternal and the Atman. As a young man, I followed the ascetics, lived in the forest, suffered heat and frost, learned to go hungry, taught my body how to wither. Then miraculously knowledge came to me in the teaching of the great Buddha, and I felt the realization of the unity of the world circulating in me like my own blood. But I also had to leave the Buddha and that great wisdom behind. I went and learned from Kamala the pleasures of love, learned business for Kamaswami, accumulated money, frittered money away, learned to love my stomach, learned to indulge my senses. It took me many years of that to lose my connection with mind, to lose the ability to think, to forget unity. Is it not true that slowly and by long circuitous ways I changed from a man to a child, from a thinker to one of the child people? But still this journey was good, and still the bird in my breast did not die. But what a journey that was. I had to pass through so much ignorance, so much vice, such great misunderstanding, so much revulsion and disappointment and misery, just to become a child again and start over. But it was right. My heart affirms it. My eyes laugh upon it. I had to experience despair. I had to sink to the level of the stupidest of all thoughts, the thought of suicide, in order to be able to experience grace, to hear again, to sleep properly again, and be able to awaken properly. I had to become a fool to find Atman in myself again. I had to sin to be able to live again. Where can my way lead now? It is a foolish way. One has to drag oneself along it. Maybe it is circular, but let it be as it pleases. I will follow it. He felt a wonderful surge of joy within him. Where, he asked his heart, are you getting this happiness from? Is it really from that long, good sleep that did me so much good, or is it from the word that I uttered, or does it come from the fact that I have skipped out, I have made good my escape, I am finally free again like a child under the sky? Oh, how good is it to have gotten away, to be free. How pure and beautiful the air is here. How good to breathe. There in the place I ran away from, everything smelled of unguents, unguents, spices, wine, excess, lethargy. How I hated that world of rich men, gluttons, and gamblers. How I hated myself for staying so long in that horrific world. How I hated myself, robbed myself, poisoned myself, tormented myself, made myself into someone old and nasty. No, never again will I imagine, as I used to do so readily, that Siddhartha is wise. But one thing I have done that is good, that pleases me, that I find laudable, I have now put an end to that self-hatred and that foolish, empty life. Praise be to you, Siddhartha. After so many years of stupidity, you have once again had an idea. You have done something. You have heard the bird in your breast singing, and you followed it. Thus he praised himself, rejoiced himself, and listened to his stomach with curiosity as it growled with hunger. He felt that in the last period, over the last days, he had fully chewed and thoroughly tasted a great mass of suffering, a great chunk of misery, and spit it out. He had devoured every last bit of it to the point of despair and death. This was good. He might have stayed a lot longer with Gamaswami, making and squandering money, stuffing his belly, and letting his soul die of thirst. He might have lived a lot longer in that soft, well-upholstered hell if one thing had not come about. The moment of total hopelessness and despair, that moment of final extremity when he hung over the rushing water and was ready to destroy himself. That he had felt that despair, that profoundest revulsion had not been broken by it, that the bird, that wellspring, that happy voice was still alive in him. That is where his joy came from. That is why he was laughing. That is why his face was radiant beneath his graying hair. It is good, he thought, to experience directly for oneself what one has to understand. I already understood as a child that the pleasures of the world and the wealth are not good things. I understood that long ago, but I have only just now experienced it. Now I know it, not only from memory, but with my eyes and my heart, my stomach. Good for me for knowing it. He reflected for a long time on his transformation, listened to the bird sing with joy. Had this bird within him not died? Had he not felt its death? No, something else in him had died, something that had been longing to die for a long time. Was it not the same thing he had wanted to exterminate in his ardent years as an ascetic? Was it not his ego, his little fearful and prideful ego against which he had fought for so many years, but which had conquered him again? Which was there again after every extermination, banishing joy and feeling fear? Was it not this that finally today had died here in the forest by this lovely river? Was it not because of this death that he was now like a child, so full of confidence, so fearless, so full of joy? Now Siddhartha also knew why, as a Brahmin and an ascetic, his fight against his ego had been futile. Too much knowledge had held him back, too many sacred verses, too many ritual rules, too much denial, too much doing and striving. He had been full of arrogance. He had been full of arrogance, always the smartest, always the most industrious, always a step ahead of everybody, always wise and spiritual, always a priest or sage. Into this priesthood, into this high-mindedness, into this spirituality, his ego had crept. It had anchored itself there and grown even as he thought he was destroying it through fasting and austerities. Now he saw it and saw that the secret voice had been right. No teacher could ever have saved him. That is why he had to go into the world and abandon himself to pleasure and power, women and money. Why he had to be a merchant and dice player, a drinker, and a man consumed with greed. Until the priest and Shramana within him were dead. That's why he had to continue to endure these ugly years, to endure the revulsion, emptiness, and meaninglessness of a lost and desolate life until the end, to the point of bitter despair, until Siddhartha the hedonist, Hedonist, Siddhartha the greedy, could die. He had died, and a new Siddhartha had awakened from his sleep. He too would get old and would have to die. Siddhartha wasn't permanent. Every formed thing was impermanent, but today he was young, a child, the new Siddhartha, and full of joy. He thought these thoughts, listened with a smile to his stomach, heard with gratitude a buzzing bee. He thought these thoughts, listened with a smile to his stomach, heard with gratitude a buzzing bee. Cheerfully he looked into the flowing river. Never had he liked water as much as in the river. Never had he perceived the sound and image of moving water as so vivid and beautiful. It seemed to him that the river had something special to tell him, something he did not yet know that still lay ahead of him. In this river Siddhartha had wanted to drown himself. In it today the old, tired, despairing Siddhartha had drowned. But the new Siddhartha felt a profound love toward his flowing stream and resolved not to leave it soon. That was the end of that chapter.